Hey guys, it's Rick from Roll with the Punches, and today I want to talk about anxiety. This is a video I've wanted to make from the beginning, and I've had a really tough time trying to figure out exactly what I want to talk about for the first one, because it's such a huge topic. It's something that's been such a huge part of my life, and as a result of that, I've learned a lot about it over the years. So I could talk for hours upon hours, but I don't want to do that for the first one. I also was really just having trouble sitting down and trying to write out my ideas. So we're just going to spew it out and kind of see what happens. But today I'm going to focus on my own experiences with anxiety and how it's affected my life. And the goals of the video are, if you're experiencing this, to let you know that you're not alone. Maybe you'll recognize some of these things and didn't know you had anxiety, and you can go get the help that you need. But even if you do, just letting you know that other people are dealing with this as well, and you're not alone. It's not a hopeless situation. I would say for most of my life, if I ranked my anxiety from 1 being no anxiety and 10 being max anxiety, I've lived most of my life at like an 8 average, I would say. But over the past year or two, I would say that's dropped down to a 3 average. And I've had anxiety for as long as I can remember. I've been diagnosed since I was 11. So no matter how long you've been dealing with it, I think there's still hope for you. So that's kind of the main purposes of the video, and also to just give you a better understanding maybe of why I am the way that I am and why I do the things that I do. So I do want to mention, recently I was also diagnosed with autism, and I think my autism and anxiety are linked, a lot of it. I'm still trying to figure it out and put like that lens into my childhood and try to figure out like what was autism, what was anxiety, what did one like factor into the other. And I don't have those answers. I'm still trying to figure that out. So I'm mainly going to be talking about just anxiety today, not necessarily the autism aspect. And I also have panic disorder, but I'm going to save that for another video as well and just deal with anxiety, generalized anxiety, social anxiety, those kind of things. So that's going to be it for the video today. But in the future, hoping to cover things like panic disorder and autism as well. I'll start out by saying that anxiety is something that everyone experiences. So if you go through an assessment or you go through some of the symptoms of anxiety, I'm sure everyone has experienced those things. When it becomes something that's diagnosable is how much it's affecting your life. So when you take these assessments, it's like in the last 2 weeks, has this never affected your life or your ability to live your life? Has it done it occasionally? Has it done it most of the time? Or has it done it all of the time? And so when you get diagnosed, it's a lot of all of the time. Like it's something that is just pervasive in your life. It affects the things that you're able to do to be able to live a normal life. And it can be acute, it can be chronic. Everyone deals with anxiety, but what I'm talking about specifically today is anxiety that is more long-term and is heavily affecting your life. So the first symptom I want to talk about is the one that I feel like is the root, at least to mine, is this overwhelming sense of dread, this constant sense that something terrible is about to happen. And it just puts your entire body on edge, and it leads to a lot of these other symptoms that I'm going to talk about. And everyone feels a sense of dread sometimes, like if you have to go and make a speech or give a book report or something, if you have to go to a high place and that's something that makes you nervous. People experience that, but for me, it was something that I had all the time. And it didn't matter if I was riding in a car, if I was at home watching a movie, like I just felt this sense in myself that my body was in danger. Like that's what my brain was telling me. And there was no reason for it. It just would happen all the time. And it would cause all kind of different things. So since I was a kid, I had a lot of stomach issues. And my mom took me to the doctor to try and figure out what those were. But it was just anxiety. You can get nausea, like a twisting stomach. I'm sure everyone has experienced this at some point when you've been nervous to do something. But for me, it just was all the time. Like I had a lot of problems with diarrhea or a lack of appetite, stomach pains as well. Just like, you know, bending over in pain, stomach pains that was just a result of anxiety. And you get those pains, and then you're like, well, something must be wrong because this hurts real bad. So you get anxious about those pains, and then you get more anxiety, and then the pains can get worse. It's just kind of a repeating cycle. For most of my life, especially in the mornings, like I would wake up, I would have this terrible sickness in my stomach about going to school or about going to work, and just feeling like if I stepped out that door, like the world was going to end or I was going to die or something like that. And that can build up to a panic attack, which I'll talk about later. But just not having the adrenaline rush and not having that fight or flight response, but just a general overbearing feeling of dread. And that puts your body on defense mode, which causes the stomach pains. It can also cause things like difficulty swallowing or a dry throat. Like your body has a response to that feeling, and it comes with a lot of physical, not ailments, but physical symptoms as well. They can be scary, and they can hit you when you least expect them. So I'm going to go over some of those. I talked about the stomach already. A big one for me was feeling like I couldn't catch my breath. Like you sort of get so tense, you get this feeling like you can't take a deep breath, even though you're breathing fine. It's just a response of your body to the anxiety. And that one, especially for me, can be super scary. Like I had a lot of problems with asthma as a kid, and just that feeling of not being able to breathe is something that I still remember from the time when I had asthma. So being able to feel like you can't take that deep breath has always been a big one for me. And just the tightness of the chest. You can also get a pain in the chest as well, which as you get older, like, is this what a heart attack feels like? But it's just like your body being tense all the time like this. It sort of can cause these pains and these sorenesses that are real. It's not something that's just in your head. Like your body is actually feeling these things, but they're not harmful. It's just you're tense all the time, and this is kind of your body's way of dealing with that. Sweating of the hands, shaking of the hands as well. That's one of my big like visual indicators, because I've been anxious for so long, like I can kind of just coast through some of the symptoms, but I can notice like if my hand is shaking a lot, especially if I have to like write a check or something, I can be like, oh, okay, like I'm actually feeling pretty anxious right now. So that's sort of one of the more like visual indicators for me, rather than just like relying on the feeling, because your brain wants you to believe that there is something wrong. And so it's hard to just dismiss these feelings, these symptoms as anxiety. But that one being a little more visual to me for whatever reason kind of helps click it in my head of like, oh, okay, I'm feeling very anxious right now. So kind of related to difficulty in feeling breathing, at least for me, is also like a lump in the throat or feeling like you can't swallow very well. That can kind of compound for me, where it's like, well, I can't swallow very well, so maybe my throat is closing up, and that's why I feel like I can't breathe. And obviously, that is a very real fear when it comes to like an allergic reaction or something like that. But anxiety can cause that feeling as well, and you're fine. Like your throat is not going to close up. It feels that way. It's a response to the anxiety of your body, but your body is not actually going to close your throat. It just can feel very scary, and it's hard to know if it's the anxiety or is it something else? Like, is this something I should be worried about? For me, I just got to a point where if any symptom was on the anxiety checklist, which we'll pretty much go through the entire checklist here because I've dealt with all of them, I would just kind of dismiss it as best I could. It's really hard to do that sometimes, especially when they come out of nowhere and they come very strongly. Like I would make sure to keep on my like checkups and things and occasionally get things checked out to be like, okay, this isn't a medical issue. It's just the anxiety messing with me. It's my own brain messing with me and making me feel these things. So like I talked before about having trouble catching your breath, you can, as a result of that, you can start to hyperventilate, which is to breathe too shallow too quickly. And that can cause additional symptoms as well. I would get like tingling in my extremities, particularly in my fingers, and a tingling in my nose. It's why when you're feeling very anxious or you're having panic attacks, you want to sit down, because it is possible to hyperventilate yourself like until you faint. I've done that a couple times. It's very rare, and again, it's not something that can hurt you. Like if you do that, when you wake up, your body is just going to take over regularly again, and you're completely fine. Like it's very scary, but it's again not something that can hurt you or something that you need to be afraid of. I know we can't choose necessarily what we're afraid of in our anxieties, but it is comforting to know that like I've had anxiety for this long and like my health is fine for the most part, right? Like, yes, it's all very scary, but it is safe. So another symptom that can happen kind of not directly, but I would get a lot of headaches. And that's, again, just from the tension. You can get a lot of tension in your neck or upper shoulders. Also, my scalp would get very sensitive as well. And apparently that's pretty common. When you're just tight for a long period of time, you can suffer from that. The last symptoms I think I'll talk about, I might be forgetting some, is more of like a state of mind. And again, this can kind of lead into the panic attacks a little more, but it can feel like you're losing control of reality or you're going insane. You can have a sensation of you're moving when you're stationary, or the world is moving when you're stationary. And this is just like a trick that your eyes play on you when you're feeling very anxious. And again, it's a symptom that's very scary, but can't actually hurt you. And like once you calm down, will pass very quickly. A lot of these symptoms are described in Hope and Help for Your Nerves by Claire Weeks. And I want to do some videos going over that book in detail, because it's the best book that I've found on anxiety. For now, I just kind of want to describe the ones that I've felt and kind of how they feel. And they all feel very scary. But once you know about anxiety and the fact that these symptoms are coming from that, it does help a lot. Okay, so I've talked about some of the symptoms that I've dealt with, and I've had them all to very severe levels. Now I kind of want to talk about like how anxiety has affected my life. And that's a tough one, because it's something that I've struggled with for a very long time. It's something that's stopped me from doing a lot of things that I've wanted to do. And it's just made so many things painful that should have been happy. And again, I don't know if autism was feeding into some of this or not, but I like routine and I don't like change very much. So I also have always struggled in like just leaving the house. Like I always was a homebody. I always wanted to be home. So like going to school was always a big problem. Like once I was at school, it usually got less, but just the act of, well, I'm home, and if I can be sick enough, then maybe I don't have to go to school kind of thing, where there's that possible out, right? Where you're leaving yourself in, okay, if things get bad enough with my anxiety, then I won't do this thing. And your anxiety really grips onto that. That's what fuels it. That's what gives it power. And then that will lead to what I'm going to talk in a little bit about agoraphobia, which is something that I've also struggled with. Like one of the ways I've dealt with anxiety has just been to remove the choice of being like, okay, it doesn't matter. Like I could be puking on my way out the door. I'm going to go and do this thing. Like there's no reality, there's no possibility of me not doing this thing. I'm just going to go do this thing. And, the anxiety fights back, but it does dissipate eventually. But if you give in to it, then that's when there can be a problem. So I'll skip ahead to about 15 or 16 years old. This is when I started really having panic attacks a lot. I would have them some before then, but that is around the age when I got diagnosed and it became a real problem. So I was in college because I skipped most of high school and went directly to college. And so I would feel a great deal of anxiety. I had a long drive from my parents' house to the college, which was also the place that I worked. Like, I would just feel such an anxiety driving there. And again, once I got there, it wasn't too bad, but it was the getting there that was the problem. And I had all these places that I could turn around and go home, or I could turn here and go to my great aunt's house or something like that. So, stomach would just be ruined, and like you're driving and like it feels like your bladder's full, so you have to stop all the time and use the bathroom, or because of the diarrhea, you have to stop like constantly, or you feel like you need to stop. And it's scary dealing with this while you're driving because, well, normally if I hyperventilate and pass out, like if I'm sitting down, I'm okay. But if I do that while I'm driving, that's not great. Now, I knew like when that was a possibility. Like hyperventilating doesn't come out of nowhere. It's something that builds up over time. So I could have pulled off the side of the road and calmed myself down and been okay. But it doesn't feel like that in the moment, definitely. So I would, leaving my parents' house, I would reset the odometer every time, the trip odometer. And I would know like exactly how many miles it would be to certain points, whether I could stop at those points, like if they were pull-offs or if they had restrooms or something like that. And I would have like these stages of like, okay, like, I could make it this far and not have a panic attack or not have too much anxiety. And I would just kind of track that distance. And what started to happen was I would go to a place, so let's say like Walmart, for example, and then like I would have a tremendous amount of anxiety, I would have panic attacks, and I would be like, okay, well, I can't go to Walmart anymore because this is going to happen, and I don't want this to happen because it's the worst feeling in the world. So like, you wouldn't go to Walmart anymore. And eventually that turned into, well, I can only drive this far before it happens, and I can't go any further. So then it's like, well, I can't go into town, or I can't go to school anymore. Luckily, when this got the worst, it was during summer, so I didn't really have classes, and I wasn't working. But it got bad enough where there was a period where I couldn't leave my parents' house without having panic attacks. So it was full-on agoraphobia, where like I just couldn't do that. Like I couldn't leave. And that made it okay for a little while, but eventually that wasn't enough. Like I was having panic attacks inside the house too. One of the hardest things for me to deal with is the anxiety sleep cycle. So when I'm very anxious, I have trouble sleeping. And if I don't sleep well, then my anxiety gets way worse. Like sleep is the biggest factor for me on my anxiety or how likely I am to have a panic attack. And so during that period when I couldn't leave the house, what happened was I was not sleeping very well because I was concerned about how I was feeling, but also like, well, I can't live my life like this. Like eventually I'm going to have to go back to school. I'm going to have to go to work. So this is not a permanent solution. And it was just a very anxious time for me. So I was anxious and not getting great sleep. And then eventually what that turned into was I would, my body would start to fall asleep. And I don't know if other people experience this, probably. Like at a certain point, you've like had a moment where you're just falling asleep and you start awake. Well, that would happen, but as part of the starting awake, it would be an immediate like level 10 panic attack. And then that would obviously be terrible and last for an hour or two. Or it would cycle, like a panic attack would end, but another one would begin. And after that was done and I started to finally calm down again, I would almost fall asleep and then start awake in another panic attack. And I might have gotten a few minutes sleep here and there, but that lasted for 11 days. And that was the hardest time in my life. Like I'd never been more scared. There was nothing I could seem to do to fix it. It was just a very hard experience to go through. And like even now, when the anxiety and the panic are much better, there's always like the thought in the back of my mind of like, well, if I don't keep on this path to deal with this in the right way, like that's where I could end back up. And that really scares me because that was really hard to go through. That was obviously a terrible experience, but it did end, obviously. Here I am. BERSERK actually was a pretty big factor, I think, in getting me through that one. You know, it's kind of silly, like it's a fictional character, but like reading about the things that Guts, the main character, went through and like continued to move on from, I looked at myself and was like, well, this is nothing compared to that. So like I could get through this. It was just very inspiring for me at the time. And it's why it's like my favorite thing, because it helped me get through this. But eventually I got to the point where I was like, well, I can't live like this any longer. I've pretty much reached my limit here. So I am going to leave the house. And if leaving the house kills me, because that's, you know, what it feels like, right? The panic and the anxiety is like, you know, if you don't listen to me, you're going to die. You're in danger. I was like, well, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm going to leave. I'm going to drive. And if my body gives out, if the panic takes over, like, that's fine. But I can't do this anymore. And I was able to get past it and go back to school and go back to work and drive again and eventually move out and live on my own and then meet Maggie and get married and have kids. Like, that was kind of the crossroads. And since then, it's a very visceral gut feeling whenever I feel like anxiety is stopping me from doing something, which it still has a lot of times. The first time I had an opportunity for Blind Wave to go to E3, anxiety was real bad, and I didn't feel like I could go. But I always try to like say to myself, you know, if anxiety is the only thing stopping me, I've got to do it. Like, I've got to take away the choice. I've just got to do it, because giving into it leads back to those 11 days. And I don't want to go through that again. I don't always have the strength to go through with those convictions, but more often than not, I am able to. And there's other things that I've been doing recently, which we'll talk about on the channel, that has made my anxiety so much less. And panic attacks are no longer a daily thing. They're rare. They still happen. I still have anxiety, but it's now no longer every day. It is sometimes, and even the sometimes, the level is not as high. So one of the hardest parts about anxiety for me was I just felt so ashamed of it. Like, my mom knew, and my doctor who diagnosed me and therapist knew, but like no one in my outside family, my extended family, like none of my friends knew. I told Maggie when like we started dating, like what I was dealing with, and but I didn't want her to tell her family. Like, I felt very ashamed that, you know, at the time, thoughts of like, if only I was stronger, like I would be better than this, and I wouldn't be this way. So like, I didn't want people to know, because I didn't want them to think that I was weak or that they needed to treat me differently. Like, you know, they couldn't put stress on me because I was already so stressed all the time anyway. And that, you know, very recently, I would say the last 3 or 4 years, really once I've just started talking about it on the Blind Wave podcast, like that's really the first time that I had been open talking about it. And that was a huge relief. So if it is something that you're dealing with, don't feel ashamed about it. You shouldn't. Like, there's nothing, you're not a bad person because you feel this way, because you have anxiety, or because you have depression, or because you have autism or ADHD. Like, that does not make you a bad person or a weak person. So talk about it with people. There's lots of people out there dealing with it too. And knowing that helps. And not being ashamed about it is a big step in the recovery process, I think. So get out there. Talk to people. Put it in the comments below if you're struggling with it. I want to hear. We have a Roll with the Punches channel over at the Blind Wave Discord, where you can talk about some of your struggles as well. Don't be ashamed. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And that took me a long time to learn, but once I did, I felt a lot better. So hopefully that can help you too. So it's been good, and that's one of the reasons I started this channel. I mean, that's the main reason I started this channel, was I know how terrible that is to go through. And if I can help one person go from where I was to where I am now, then it is all worth it, because it's hard. And even with people to support you, you feel alone, and you can feel like ashamed that you're not stronger than this. But it's got nothing to do with strength, and it's got nothing to do with fighting against it. It's about just finding a way to move with it and move past it. So that is what Roll with the Punches is about. I hope this rambling video made some semblance of sense. If you have specific topics you want me to go over when it comes to anxiety, like I said, I want to do a ton of videos on this. This is just giving you a basic background of what anxiety has been like in my life. And I mean, we'll have to make another one of these at some point, because I'm curious where my anxiety is going to be next year and the year after that. So let me know what you want to see, and know that you're not alone, and that there's hope. Thanks, guys. Get out there, roll with the punches, and I'll see you next time.